Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of BJJ Meditations. I'm your host, Joe Hannon. This is BJJ Meditations number 18. And I'm a little pressed for time this week because I just saw that my son napped for 45 minutes at school, which means I need to hurry up and get this thing done before he comes home and turns into a holy terror. This week's BJJ meditation is about the nature of a good roll. This is something that is often debated among grapplers. I find everybody has their own definition of what a good roll is. And I think that definition can change based on your partner and based on the circumstances. So let's take a look at those themes in BJJ meditation number 18. What is a good roll in Jiu Jitsu? What makes for a good roll? In some ways, it's like asking what makes for a good painting. There are a near infinite number of variables to account for, along with the subjectivity of the viewer. A good roll is also situational, contextual. It's going to look and feel different for the 200-pound man gearing up for ADCC and the 100-pound woman who just learned to tie her belt. Many people who are new to the sport, men especially, appear to think that to roll well is to roll hard. And this is sometimes true. Sometimes training demands competition level intensity. But knowing when this intensity is appropriate and what it feels like is challenging to the neophyte. Often the neophyte doesn't know how hard they're rolling, and they're clueless about pace modulation. They're either stomping on the gas or the brake. No finesse, no in between. Most of the time, as grapplers progress, they begin to match the strength and intensity of their training partners. This is how the 200-pound man and the 100-pound woman can have an interesting but safe roll. The man only gives as much strength as he gets. Either party can throttle the pace up and down safely, and the roll becomes a technical exchange, not a power battle. Of course, there are some who can't abide by this. They can't lose to anyone, let alone a smaller female opponent. The worst part is that some of these grapplers are in denial about this. They can't, or maybe they won't see it. What do we do for them? And should we do for them what they can't do for themselves? Yeah, so one of the ideas that came up in this meditation is strength. Strength is calling somebody strong in jiu-jitsu. It might be one of the worst insults you can deliver. At least I think so. And in fact, I had a roll last Saturday, with a visitor to our school, a black belt. And we had a pretty good round, and at the end of the round, that was the first thing he said to me. He's like, "Oh man, you're really strong," and kind of a backhanded compliment, right? Like, I don't ever want to be called strong, because being called strong implies that I'm using a lot of muscle in my rolls. And then today I had a roll with one of the guys in the morning crew who's on the smaller side, and he was kind of frustrated after the roll, and he was saying like, "Oh man, you're so strong, there's nothing I can do." And you hear something one time and you're like, "Yeah, whatever, just dismiss it." This is as much a podcast on stoicism as it is anything else. So if you're truly internally oriented, you can kind of take criticism with a grain of salt, but you still have to pay attention to it. You still have to assess the validity of it. Then I heard it a second time from this guy I train with pretty regularly, and it caused me to pause. So I asked him, and I'm like, "Look, some meaningful feedback here. Like, do you feel like I'm muscling you when we're training? Or like, what do you mean when you say, you feel strong?" And that produced what I thought was a productive conversation. And ultimately what he was saying is that, I'm creating my frames in such a way where only strength could overpower them. Like, the position that I've established is so sound that the only way he could escape it would be to overpower me. And he just doesn't have the strength to do that. So, still a little bit of a gut check, a little bit of an ego check there to make sure, like, oh man, really? Am I being strong in my roles? Am I strong arming people? Because, I'm in every sense like a reformed spaz. Like, when I first started training jiu-jitsu, I was the prototypical male grappler that I describe in that meditation, not in the sense that I couldn't lose. Like, trust me, I lost a lot. I got really good at losing, and I still lose a lot. But, I just had no kinesthetic awareness, like I look like an athlete from a distance, but like try to have me catch a ball or to run quickly or to do anything that requires any modicum of coordination. And, it's not going to end well for me. It's usually going to end in me dropping the ball, tripping over my own 2 feet, or just looking like an ass in general terms. So yeah, I had a lot to overcome there, particularly just building up the bodily awareness of what the appropriate pace was, what the appropriate amount of strength was, regardless of who I was training with. It didn't matter if it was a smaller person or a larger person. I just had no idea how out of control I was. And also I had that sort of Jocko get after it mentality of like, if I'm totally exhausted 2 minutes into the round, good, I'm clearly doing something right. I'm pushing myself. And, to challenge that a little bit, part of that is true. Like, we do join this sport, we do roll jiu-jitsu to make ourselves better. And if we don't, then you're kind of missing out on one of the core benefits of it. But better is subjective. Better depends on the context of who you're training with. Better depends on why you're training, right? So if you're training with somebody who is a lot smaller than you, maybe there's a skill gap there too. Better or good is going to be contingent on those two scenarios. There's one of the people in my school who I hold in very high regard is this guy Colin of the Tinfoil Matt podcast, half of the Tinfoil Matt podcast. One of the best things about Colin, I think, is that Colin, he's well over 6 feet tall. He's a large guy, but he can train with anybody, and he can train technically with anybody. I've seen him train with women who are 5 foot and a few inches and, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. And both of them will have a great exchange. And, I've also seen him go at it with guys his size, no problem too. And that's just because he's refined his technical skills in such a way where he doesn't rely on strength at all. It's just the proficiency of his guard playing or the proficiency of his passing versus that of his opponents. And, that's really, I think, what we're all striving for, regardless of what shape or size we are in the sport, what level of athleticism we have in the sport. We're just trying to be good training partners who can read the situation, see it as it is, see our partner's skills as they are, and respond accordingly. I get the sun like blasting me in the face here. Oh, it feels so bad. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Shift this way. Yeah. That situational awareness, building that up, comes with time. It's not something that you're going to learn immediately. It's something that you're going to learn, I think, more efficiently if you're watching footage of yourself rolling, if you're asking for feedback from upper belts. But again, that feedback, it's very hard to externalize and see yourself accurately. It's undeniable when you see the video of yourself and you thought you were moving like Neo in the Matrix, but really you look dangerous and you look kind of spastic. Kind of hard to refute that evidence. But yeah, this is something that I think about a lot because, especially with younger men, younger white belts and blue belts, I see it as one of the biggest limiting factors in terms of things that are holding up their growth in jiu-jitsu. If they just learned how to relax, then I think they would learn faster. They would be able to absorb this technique a little bit better. But there's the challenge there of like telling somebody to relax. Like if you've ever told your partner to relax in a heated moment, you know how well that goes. It's not something I strongly suggest by any stretch. Same thing to a grappler in a heated exchange. If you tell them to relax, it kind of is like a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face and you have no idea what that slap even means. So it's confusing if nothing else. And I don't really have any answers for how to train this out of people other than the few things that I've tried. And I've only been teaching for about a year now, so I can't even tell you how successful they are. But one of the things that I consistently try to do when there are newer people in the room is narrow the constraints for training. So if we're doing situational training, the situation starts extremely narrow. It might be you're working one guard pass against one guard, and if the person on top passes, you reset top and bottom. Or it might be things just like trying to articulate these things more clearly, like for example, I'll say, okay, we're doing this positional training with 40% intensity. To me, that means you should not be exerting yourself to the point where you couldn't hold a conversation, right? And I'll actually observe the room. And as soon as I hear people start to breathe heavily, I'll actually stop and say, if you're out of breath right now, you're overexerting yourself. But again, like I don't really have answers for that question that I've thought about or practiced more completely than those two things that I just mentioned. So if you have some ideas for what's worked for you or what's worked in your school, I'm definitely open to them. And I would love to try them out for myself and my own classes. But yeah, I think it's one of the biggest limiting factors in growth for grapplers is just learning how to relax, learning how to get a better calibration, a better assessment for what that good roll actually is, building the situational awareness to throttle up or down the pace, and the situational awareness to use strength and not use strength, depending on when it's appropriate. Yeah, all these things come with time, but man, if we could figure out a great way to shorten that time, it's going to make people better faster. So thanks everybody for listening to BJJ Meditations number 18. Just as a reminder, all of these meditations are available as NFTs, small essays on the Ethereum-based blockchain site Mirror. So if you want to financially support this podcast, that's the best way to do it. I don't know what Ethereum's trading at today, but I think each of them is like $15. So we're not talking an exorbitant sum of money. And it's also kind of just like a low risk way you could explore crypto if you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine too. This is a free resource first and foremost, and it will always continue to be a free resource. You can consume this content however you want. You can read the essay yourself. You don't have to listen to me narrate it or riff on it at the end of it. But you could also consume this on YouTube. It's available as a podcast everywhere there are podcasts. And the best way to stay up to date with all things BJJ Meditations related is to follow our Instagram account. It's BJJ_meditations. And yeah, if you're ever interested in taking a class with me personally, I'm an instructor at Princeton Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in Princeton, New Jersey. We always welcome guests from any and all schools, and I would love to see you on the mats. Please feel free at any time to hit me up with questions on Instagram, things you might want me to address on this podcast, or seriously, if you have any ideas about that question I posed earlier in this podcast of how do we get people to learn how to modulate their pace sooner, I'm all ears. Let me know. Thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please review it on whatever platform you're watching or listening to it on, and share it with a fellow grappler. Thanks, and we'll catch you next week.